Welcome, travelers. We're aware that your journey was difficult, but prepare to have your questions answered, for you have been granted an audience with the Masters of Modern.
And welcome back to Masters of Modern. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here without my co-host, Ben Bateman. He's at Gen Con, where if you're at Gen Con right now, you should go check it out. But today, I have a guest host, John Semeyn. Say hi.
Hi.
So we'll get into who John is in a second. If you want to get to the meat of the episode today, we're talking about what happened at the Mythic Championship 4 this last weekend, all of the Hogaak goodness. If you look at the time code right now in the video or skip to the time code in the notes, you can skip all of us talking about all the news that happened this week and introducing stuff and shout outs and all that stuff. But we'll see you guys there. For people that want to keep listening to talking, welcome. Today's great. Tell us about yourself.
Just like my Magic career in general, or
Magic career in general, plus what you're going to be taking to the table today with all of the data analysis that you were able to do over the Pro Tour, as well as where people can find you, like on Twitter. By the way, I am at Cass Wiley, and we are at the MMCast.
Okay, so I started playing Magic, I think about 5 years ago now, right around the time that Born of the Gods came out. Not the best time to get into Magic, but I'm
not
still
the
here.
worst, not the worst.
Yeah, definitely not the worst, but I'm still around, so didn't sour me too much on it.
A little magic baby, born of the gods. That was just yesterday.
I think that might be one of my least favorite formats. Continue, though. Yeah, Thank God you survived.
It was the block that convinced Wizards, we should stop doing 3 sets.
Yeah, and specifically because of Born of the Gods and Journey of the Nyx. Imagine if Journey of the Nyx was the whole set. Constellation might be my favorite underutilized mechanic, and the thing I'm most excited about a return to Theros about. Devotion's cool too. Go. Sorry, continue.
So I started playing more competitively, starting to go FNMs and stuff when I first started going to college. And basically, as soon as I figured out that I needed to have a real deck to compete with the people at FNM, went real deep into competitive Magic, started playing Grand Prix and stuff like that. My highlight was I actually finished second in a Legacy Grand Prix.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What were you playing?
It was actually in Vegas a couple years ago, and I was playing Blue-Red Delver, but the Prowess version. So the less of the Wasteland Stifle type package and more of just try to get you dead.
Yeah. So Blue-Red Prowess Delver. For people who focus entirely on the modern format, is it a similar type deck to the Is It Prowess decks that we've seen crop up recently?
Yeah, I think the closest analog would be, if you remember the Blue-Red Wizards deck before it became more of your typical Delver deck, when it was just more trying to utilize the Prowess creatures. It was pretty similar to that build of the deck, where you're basically just playing a bunch of burn spells, a bunch of cantrips, trying to pump up your creatures as fast as possible.
So it's almost blue-red burn, except because Delver is basically a goblin guide in the deck for all intents and purposes. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically blue-red burn, but you also get to play Daze and Force.
Right. Okay.
And it's got Monastery Swift Spear and like Soul Scar Mage and that sort of thing going on?
At the time, I was not playing Soul Scar Mage. I actually did play a mirror match with someone who was playing Soul Scar Mage.
Cool. So today we're going to be talking about, obviously, the Mythic Championship, and your current career / lifestyle involves going to school for data analytics and data programming, correct? And so you, over the weekend, tried out a whole program, and we're going to get a little bit into the data as we talk about what happened at the Pro Tour, and you're going to help accomplish that.
Yep.
Cool. Other things news-wise, I mean, the big news was just that Pro Tour. Things that are more shout-out based that we'll get through real quick. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, Ben is currently at Gen Con, and Cass has a booth at Gen Con. You can go try out our game that we kickstarted last year called Battle Bosses. You can even buy one of our limited edition squishy dragons that Marshall's going to throw at me so I can show it on camera. This is Ryu. I caught it. I'm so proud about it. It's a squishy. Look at it, squish. And then there's also a blue and red one named Izzy, which we have somewhere in here and maybe we'll find later. We found it. And it's in packaging. So this is what they look like when they're in packaging. They're adorable. They squish. They got little vampire teeth. And they have this cool dot material. So make sure to go check that out. You can get them there. Also, you can play test the game. And yeah, so definitely check out Cast at Gen Con. The other thing we want to announce really quick is that Wednesday morning, July 31st, is there 31st one days in July? Yes. Cool. Wednesday morning, July 31st, when this podcast aired, I will also be hosting Twitch Rivals. They're doing a big arena tournament with a bunch of different streamers. Wedge is going to be on there, Amazonian. There's a whole list that I could read eventually, but it's going to be really awesome. I'm going to be on it. You guys should check it out. And then the last big shout out is at GP Vegas on Friday, and Ben will kind of give a little bit more information next week. We're doing a trivia show. So if you know about Ben's kind of career and content creation, he does a thing called the Schmodown, which is this live action wrestling meets trivia. We're kind of trying to take some of that format and apply it to Magic. We're going to have 3 teams, and then we'll also do audience participation where you get to answer some of the questions. So if you are at GP Vegas or Mythic Magic Fest Vegas, if you're at Magic Fest Vegas, maybe participating in one of the GPs there, on Friday from 5 to 7, we'll be doing our trivia show. So definitely come to the live stream stage. It'll be a blast, or tune in if they're live streaming, which I believe they are. So let's get into the meat of this episode. So I guess this Mythic Championship, I feel like, is defined by 2 factors. One is Hogaak was 20% of the format, and the banning really didn't do anything to get rid of him, of Bridge from Below. So one question we will eventually question is, do we unban Bridge from Below? Was that a reason to get rid of it? But 20% of the format was Hogaak. It had the best. I mean, we'll get into some of the numbers later. But the other thing is, because Hogaak was such a large percent of the format and the most played card was Leyline of the Void, everyone forgot their artifact hate. So Tron and not Affinity anymore. It is called
Hardened Scales.
Hardened Scales faced off, and Tron won. At 1 life, I believe, in the final match. So really exciting Mythic Championship in general, with a big tint of Hogaak stomping around, being the big dude he is, and Wizards learning that they should never print Delve ever again. So why don't we talk a little bit about the data?
Sure. So as you pointed out, Hogaak was the most played deck in the tournaments, and that alone is a little worrying, especially considering it was just banned. Like, they just banned a card out of the deck.
Yeah, so for people that don't know or weren't paying attention, War of the Spark came out, printed a bunch of really powerful cards, immediately followed by Modern Horizons, printed a bunch of powerful cards. In that set of cards was the card Hogaak. Immediately after that, there was a deck with Bridge from Below and Altar of Dementia and Hogaak that was extremely powerful and kind of extremely dominant within the format. Wizards emergency banned Bridge from Below, partially because it is the joke we make on the podcast and many people make is it's more of a Yu-Gi-Oh card or Pokemon card than a regular card.
Yeah, it doesn't have any real text on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost anything to just get the benefit of it.
Right. So it's a card it's an enchantment that costs 3 black mana that I believe Aaron Forsyth wrote an article that had the most Pro Tour top or most major event top 8s with least amount of actually being cast. That if it's only in your graveyard, if a creature in play under your control dies, you make a 2/2 zombie, and then if your opponent has a creature die, it gets exiled. So they emergency banned it. It wasn't an emergency ban because it was on the schedule. Like they now, to mitigate the need of emergency bans, every set right before and right after has a banning period available to it. So they have made 8 different moments, meaning it's unlikely they'll ever emergency ban something again, unless it's really problematic. And like Hogaak maybe, but the biggest reason I can see more than even that is like a misprinting. Like they print a card and it accidentally the printer missed the number for its generic mana cost, so it's 1 blue for Time Spiral.
Well, I think that they do have the option to just errata cards. Like Hostage Taker was misprinted, but they didn't really do anything with that card other than saying this is what it should actually do.
Yeah, Walking
Atlas doesn't say it's an artifact, but it is an artifact.
Yeah. What's the 3, the Naya commander that technically just goes infinite if you use 0
Marath.
Marath. So Marath, it has X do a bunch of things, but one of those things is
one of them is it's X to create an XX elemental token. So it turns out you could infinity times make a 0/0 creature that comes into play and then dies immediately. So you have infinity ETB and death triggers the moment you cast Marath. So if you have an Essence Warden in play, you gain infinite life.
Right. So they made it so you can't use 0 for X, and that's errata, but it's part of the card. So yes. So they don't, even that emergency ban, I think you just have to be something so powerful that there was a mistake. Like the only time I can think of was Welding Jar.
You mean Memory Jar?
Memory Jar got banned between the pre-release and the release.
Well, so there was actually a pretty recent one, Sahili combo, because they didn't ban it, and then after 3 days of Moto data, they were like, "Oh, we made a mistake. We're actually gonna ban
that was an emergency ban. Yeah. But that wasn't a card that they had to print before the packs came out. But this does happen. Mistakes happen. I wonder how late in the game they added to Hogaak you can cast this from the graveyard, because like Hogaak is part of a cycle, and I think there were 3 of them in Modern Horizons that were cards that had 2 different keywords on them, right? So there are 3 cards. One of them was Throes of Chaos, which is Cascade and Retrace. The other one is Hogaak. And then Feast of Fools, which has Convoke and Devour, which is a demon. Convoke being the one fair cost reduction mechanic in Magic history. I guess variants have been fine, right?
Right. Well, I feel like there's no Convoke card. Like, there's no Convoke card that needed to be banned. And the strongest Convoke card is arguably Court of Calling, which feels fair. I don't think I've ever seen somebody like Cord where I was just like, oh, Cord is destroying Magic, because it requires...
It's worse than every 1-mana tutor ever. Like, I think it's not even seeing as much play because Eldorami's Call and Finale of Green.
Yeah, most of the
and
decks,
Collected Company. Yeah,
most of the decks that would use it are mostly getting away from it at this point.
So
they're either cutting that or Collected Company because of the variance.
Right. And then you have... I'm trying to think of another problematic... I mean, we know what the other problematic one, and it's Hogaak, but it really the issue there is Delve. I mean, if Hogaak was just a card you couldn't cast from your graveyard, just you had to cast from your hand and just had Convoke and Delve, and it was just an 8/8 trampler, I think that's fine. If he doesn't have trample, I think he's probably fine. It's just they like added trample, and you can cast this from your graveyard to like ruin everyone's
It's like
day.
Death Shadow probably would have been a card that needed to have something banned out of it by now if Death Shadow had trample.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the trample is kind of one of the more underrated evasion mechanics, just because you like it's in limited. When I face something that has trample, I'm like, oh right, I like have no way to beat this. Oh right, blocking this, it doesn't do anything, and it's normally on much bigger things than flyers, so I'm also dead soon. But yeah, so continuing with data that we know from the Mythic Championship.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Hogaak was the most played deck, which that alone is worrying. But on top of that, it had the best conversion rate to day 2, and it was, I think, a whopping 70% conversion rate. And then it also had the best win percentage overall of any of the decks.
So something to keep in mind with Mythic Championships is that they're multi-format events, right? So everyone plays for the first 2 days, 3 rounds of limited, and then plays 6 rounds of modern. But because of that, you can be a player that just does bad and limited and then therefore can't make the top 8. So the kind of the point Wizards made is that there are a bunch of players who played Hogaak decks that did really good in modern, and there are a bunch of players who did really well in limited that weren't playing Hogaak decks. And then there was one player who did both, and he made the top 8.
Yeah, and the weird kind of narrative that came out this weekend was maybe it's time for Tron again. And if you just look at the results of, or if you just look at purely the results of the 2 tournaments, Tron won both of them.
So can we quickly go over the list of in order most represented to least represented?
Yeah. Okay. So the most played decks, or I think it's the top 11 decks. So these are any decks that had 10 or more players. It was Hogaak, which was by far the most played, over 21%. And then it drops down to about 10% for Is It Phoenix, and goes down from there. Eldrazi Tron, Humans, Blue-White Control, Jund, Regular Tron, Urza Thopter Sword, Burn, Dredge, and Mono Red Phoenix.
So that's...
And when you say regular Tron, you're meaning like green?
Yes, your traditional mono green Tron, not really doing anything fancy, just trying to get big dudes out.
And something really interesting about this format walking into it is that Hogaak was kind of a known quantity. I mean, yes, on top of the fact that everyone had known deck list, on top of the fact that this is the second Mythic Championship that had the new London Mulligan rule, people knew walking into it that Hogaak was a deck that was very likely, which is why 76 copies of Leyline of the Void were in people's main decks. And
main deck, like
Yes.
main
Yeah.
deck Leyline of the Void. I think if there's another big headline from the Mythic Championship, it's like we're main decking Leylines now.
it was the most played card in the entire event.
I honestly don't know how much you should read into the main deck copies of Leyline, because open deck lists do play a big part in that.
Sure. And the London Mulligan rule does too as well.
The London Mulligan and open deck lists, the more condemning part of that is that it was the most played card overall.
Right. And it with that information being out there, the decks people were going to play were either going to be decks that beat Hogaak or Hogaak. Yeah. And so a lot of the deck lists that you see, it's a much more top-heavy format than Modern normally would be. And if we got rid of Hogaak and that deck being a problem, I do think the format levels out and actually becomes very diverse. Because once you separate that out of the format, the other list you mentioned, the Urza deck is sweet. Like, even if you get rid of Hogaak, the Vengevine deck still is a thing that exists and is powerful. You have Izzet Phoenix decks, and I don't think Izzet Phoenix is going to be the top dog anymore, like as it was 6 months ago. You have Jund back with Ren and 6, which is really, really, really... I mean, generally, every format where Jund has been powerful has been a format I pretty much appreciated in Modern, even when it was 25% of the format, because pros were being lazy and knew that it had a 55% chance of the field, and that's the type of deck that pros like playing. That was a great format. That was the Birthing Pod, Splinter Twin, Jund, Tron, Affinity era. And, generally people have really fond memories of that era of Modern. So I do think Modern is a healthy space other than Hogaak being a deck that exists.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see what the format looks like when Hogaak gets banned. And yes, I said when. I think it'll probably settle back into a pretty good spot.
Do you think they do it because isn't there a ban list announcement in the next 2 weeks? Or
The next
did we
one-
just have that one?
The next one is the 26th
Okay.
of August.
Okay. And there's no major Modern events other than Vegas.
Yeah.
Vegas is the big one.
I think there's maybe some SEG opens before then, but Vegas is the big one.
Sure. And so the big question is does Wizards feel like they need to ban Hogaak before Vegas? And I can imagine them not wanting to.
Probably not, since Modern Horizons is still in print.
Yeah, they have one more major tournament where Modern Horizons cards haven't been banned yet, and then they get past that, and then we're kind of out of Modern season, because I don't actually know, does the PTQ season system still work where it's Modern right now?
The PTQs or MCQs.
Yeah, whatever you want to call them.
are modern right now, which is a little weird because they feed, I think, a standard.
Yeah, those are now that's what's now separated. Is it's no longer feeding the tournament you played in, but the season is
Which
still
is
Modern.
really stupid. I'm just going to put it out there, Wizards.
It's a little weird.
Most Mouse Magic players are not multi-format players. They've got one or two formats they like to play. They don't like to play all of them. I remember that it was real egregious a few years ago that there were like standard PTQs feeding a legacy like Grand Prix or something, and I was like, at the time, still participating in standard, but I'm like, I have no knowledge or card base to play in a legacy,
right?
Like Pro Tour or Grand Prix.
That's the biggest. I mean, at least Modern is feeding into standard, so you're like not downgrading in cost, not necessarily in format quality. But yeah, I can imagine like winning to be in a legacy or MCQ or whatever at that time Pro Tour seems like major feel bads.
But like also like standard to feed a Modern, like there are lots of people who are new to Magic because of Arena, and so standard is something exciting and they're spending money on. But to jump from standard into Modern is, I mean, luckily the Izzet Phoenix deck, a lot of its expensive cards are right here in standard right now, but that doesn't, if anything, that makes them more expensive.
Well, and like the format's been so shaken up over the last 6 months that I think everyone was kind of in a who knows what's good mode other than Hogaak. And that's kind of where we're at, right? Like we're walking into the Grand Prix where they'll have that last format. Then we'll leave the season, and so they can either ban Hogaak at the end of this month, call it a day, and then move on towards bright and shiny new standard that comes out with Eldraine. Continuing with what other cool data stuff have we gotten from this weekend?
So like I was saying, the main narrative might be coming out this weekend that Tron is in a good spot again because it won both tournaments. But looking at how it actually performed overall at the Mythic Championship, it didn't do so good.
Sure.
It actually had the worst win percentage on day one. And then the weird thing there was, though, it jumped to the second best win percentage on day two. So it has this weird dichotomy where it's this really bad day one deck, but then it suddenly becomes very good on day two.
What I think that actually is partially an attribution to kind of what we've said on this podcast from day one, which is Modern is a format that can benefit a player from being a specialist, right? Like if what that means is in some ways, or something you can glean from that data is the people who are able to make day two with Tron are the best Tron players playing in the tournament, which means that on day two that you now have the best Tron players piloting a deck. And the other, so they have the potential to do well with it. And then if you add on a layer of the fact that there are pieces of this metagame that are very weak to Tron. Jund is bad against Tron. Like that is, and when Jund is good is when you should be playing Tron decks. So you're putting yourself in a format where Jund was one of the decks that did well in converting the day two, as did other mid-range decks. And so Tron being there allowed it to prey on those decks, and then hopefully it just doesn't get paired against some of its bad matchups. And then walking into the tournament, they better have been prepared to beat Hogaak. Other than why are you playing Tron?
Yeah, and Tron naturally has a little bit of main deck answers to Hogaak because it usually plays at least 3 copies of Relic main, or at least it can. Mm-hmm. So it does even have game against the most played deck.
Right. So you have a benefit against that. And as I mentioned kind of at the beginning of the podcast, playing an artifact, like Modern has always worked on this axis of like, how many artifact hates cards do I have available on my sideboard and how many graveyard hate cards do I have available on my sideboard? And I can't have 6 of both, really. And so generally there's a tournament that you can walk into where you're going to be benefited by being either the graveyard deck or the artifact deck. And this is a tournament that was true. You had Urza do really well. You had Tron do well. You had Hardened Scales do well. And that's because just no one was playing Stony Silence. No one was playing the new Oof.
Yeah, I think some copies of Jund had it sideboard, and I think Humans is playing the Oof now as well.
Sure.
But on day one, I don't know how much that matters.
Right.
I mean, I think that speaks to like decks like Jund and Humans and Spirits in that they are neither graveyard nor artifact decks. And so I think the strength of those decks in part lies in that a lot of people don't have a deep sideboard against decks that aren't relying on either graveyard or artifacts.
I mean, I would argue that Jund is a graveyard deck. I mean, it's like,
especially with the addition of Ren and 6.
Well, yeah, and like Tarmogoyf was always its main threat, right? You had Tarmogoyf in there and Ren and 6, and then you add layers of just other cards like Scavenging Ooze or other cards that do use the graveyard. Not to mention, like, you get into the world of Abzan that's playing Lingering Souls as part of its main reason of being Abzan.
But the big thing there is Leyline of the Void isn't great against like Tarmogoyf in particular. So the type of graveyard hate that you might want against Jund, which I'm not sure if you even want graveyard hate in that matchup, but the graveyard hate that's being played right now is not good for that matchup.
If I am playing Rest in Peace, I'd bring it in against Jund, but Leyline of Void, I agree, doesn't do anything.
Right. Well, because Rest in Peace nukes both graveyards, so that Tarmogoyf's a 0-1 in a Rest in Peace game. But in a Leyline game, your Tarmogoyf can still be a 3-4 or 4-5.
And Scavenging Ooze is classically good, I think, against Jund. And that's because you can eat their graveyard. Like, in a mirror match, having a Scavenging Ooze is great because I can make it real big.
Yeah.
So yeah, continue.
The Tron result was an interesting one where it was this terrible day one deck, and then day two, it was one of the best decks. Hogaak, like I mentioned, had the best win percentage day one, the best overall win percentage, and it actually got a little bit better on day two. I think it went from 54% win on day one to about 55 on day two. The kind of sleeper deck for this tournament, though, was the Urza deck, because it was actually pretty close to tied for the best win percentage with Hogaak.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And mind you, it's a much smaller sample size because the number of players was, I think there was 11 in day two versus 70 in day two for Hogaak.
Sure.
So sample size is much, much smaller, but it had the best win percentage on day two at 58%.
Well, it kind of plays a little bit of a different game of like on a different axis too, right? Like it's doing a little bit of what prison decks do, Artifact Prison War decks were doing. It does a little bit of what Splinterton was doing, where it was just like, oh, I win accidentally. I went infinite. Good job. With Teferi on top of that, it has that Splinter Twin angle where you can play the stuff early, have a Teferi in play, and so they can't even respond to it. It's definitely a really fascinating deck. I'm really just happy that Goblin Engineer is seeing play and as much play as it's seeing. It's just such a cool card, and I had it as a pick of one of my favorite cards from the set, and I'm glad it has found a home, as all the haters hated on me thinking that would happen.
I mean, we talked about it before, but like it definitely seems like one of the goals of Modern Horizons was to make Thopter Sword a viable threat in Modern, and it is again.
Yep.
Finally.
Sometimes you just, oops, I win.
Well, and it's a good combo regardless, right? You just always needed a good oops, I win. And before, the combo for that was you had to have 5 artifacts in play on top of making sure or 6 artifacts if you include the combo. And then you would play, what's the take extra turns? You'd play Time Sieve. So with those 3 in play, you could go off infinite turns. Yeah. Except now you're playing a bunch of cards that don't do anything.
Yeah. And even then, you get these, like, if you just have the Thopter Sword combo, it's not an automatic I win, but it's pretty close.
Right.
This just pushes it to the point where now this combo is infinite.
Mm-hmm. And you have a race moment, right? Like a lot of the times, the problem with Thopter Sword combo is there's just decks that it's too slow against. Yeah. You can't beat ad nauseum with it in play, for instance, because they're just going to kill you. Now you have the option of just going infinite, getting infinite life, infinite Thopters, drawing your whole deck, and playing everything.
Yeah. I love that there's one Spine of Ishsaw in here. Like, I can just imagine activating Goblin Engineer every turn to get back some little value rock and sacrificing your Spine so you can cast it. You just get a Vindicate plus a value every single turn.
Plus, if you hit it off of Urza, it's just free.
Right.
Well, and Urza is how you cast it, right? That's kind of part of the deal. Is Urza is his own little mini ramp spell.
Yeah, I mean, it's very telling that this deck runs 4 Mox Opals and 4 Mishra's Baubles. Like it's dumping artifacts all over the place.
And I do think it's interesting if you look at the top 8 as well, that the 2 Jund decks were actually pretty dissimilar. One was more like one had a Vraska Golgari Queen in the deck and was playing 3 Tyler's Tracker, and the other one had 4 Bloodbraid Elf instead of just 1. Where is it? And then was playing more of a Seasoned Pyromancer and Scavenging Ooze list. So like the kind of the difference between both of them was really interesting.
Did the other list have Dark Confidant in it?
It did have Dark Confidant in it.
I know a lot of Jund
no, it did
players.
not. So no Dark Confidants made it to the top 8.
Yeah, a lot of the other one did have 2 in it.
Okay, cool.
But I know a lot of Jund players are starting to get away from Dark Confidant.
Well, Renin 6, we said
Renin
this before.
6, Renin 6 especially is because all the Jund decks are picking that card up. It's just too much of a liability in the mirror.
When I was playing Dark Confidant, the card I most often wanted to draw for Dark Confidant was a land. Because I didn't take damage, and I drew a card. And then I could discard that card to Liliana. I could play it to get to my larger spells. Renin 6 just does that while being a removal spell and not accidentally killing you if you don't get a way to kill it.
Yeah.
Do you think... we were talking about Throes of Chaos a second ago, and so Throes of Chaos being a cascade spell on 4, so it has that in common with Bloodbraid Elf. Obviously, you don't get a 3/2 haster out of it, but that retrace combining with something like Renin 6, do you think there's any room for Throes of Chaos and Renin 6 in a sort of Gruul or Jund-based deck?
I would play it. I don't know how good it'll be, but that sounds something right up my alley.
I think in your more traditional Jund, it's probably not something that you would want, just because with Jund, every card has to do something, and every card, really you have to squeeze the maximum amount of value out of every single card in your deck, and Throes of Chaos sometimes just doesn't do anything.
Right. Yeah, it seems better to just be buying back, if anything, like a cycling land or a horizon land,
right?
If what you're wanting is card advantage over and over again.
The deck that I probably like it more in is the Renin 6 and Dreadhorde Arcanist decks that are playing all the suspend cards. So you could get rhinos or draw 3 cards off of the cascade effect with those cards that do that that I'm hoping are showing up on the screen and someone else says. Ancestral Visions is one of them.
Ancestral Visions and Crashing Footballs.
Thank you. Crashing Footfalls or Footballs? It's not footballs.
It's crashing footballs.
Are you sure?
Yeah, 100%.
Wow. Okay.
No, what it was is last week on the show you called it crashing footballs twice.
Okay.
And never seemed to realize it, and the fans noticed.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm just like, crashing footballs, sure, man.
We could call the deck fantasy footballs.
Yeah. I mean, casting those spells for free without having to suspend them is a fantasy.
That's what I'm. Yeah. With retrace every turn.
Yeah, man.
And how many rounds can you make? So
At least two.
At least two. So the other kind of interesting thing was that kind of a lot of the cards that were being added to Jund lists, and I think which Jund list made the top 8 is a little just kind of maybe matchup dependent. I don't necessarily think this is a statement against or for cards, but I know that the Hex Drinker was a card that a lot of people were playing with recently, which is the new card for Modern Horizons, the 1-drop level up creature snake. And then also, we only saw one copy of, and I'm going to, as I've been calling him, not that, I'm just going to say his real name. What's his name? Oh, John, where are you? Seasoned Pyromancer.
Sexy Pyromancer?
Sexy Pyromancer. I was trying not to say it. We're here now. Yeah, because a lot of decks were kind of adopting both of those as main threats in their decks, and this weekend they weren't as kind of supported. Now, I think part of that is that Scavenging Ooze was so important in this tournament that you had to cut down on other value creatures just to have something to fight the Hogaak decks. But one of the reasons I think Jund was well positioned is because they had access to one of the best main deckable graveyard hate, like it and Tron, which has Relic.
Yeah, you get to choose out a few wins here and there by just by being able to play these cards that are good in your deck, but also hate on other decks.
Right.
Yeah. I kind of wonder if that means that, like, if Hogaak isn't acted on swiftly, if that gives spirits also because of Remorseful Cleric, like the fact that they already have main deck part of their game plans that hate on the graveyard. Because I don't know, is there a human that hates on the graveyard? Like, humans doesn't have a main deck.
I don't think
hate.
so.
No.
I think Ixalan Jailer is a human, I think.
It's a zombie.
But it's
a zombie.
It's a zombie?
It's a zombie.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been thinking about, like, because I've been really excited about these Orzhov zombie lists, and Ixalan Jailer is definitely a 4 of in the board.
Oh, yeah. And the Orzhov zombie lists are really, like, that's kind of there's a good list of, like, 5 decks that weren't necessarily in the top 8, but were really cool that did do decently, and due to their bad limited performance or due to other random stuff, didn't get to the top 8. The zombie list is one of my favorites for sure. That, I think, is a real deck. There's a Goblins deck now that's just a real deck that's playing the Black-Red Goblin, the new one, Munition Expert, and all the other good new stuff that they got in Modern Horizons and M20. And then the third one, which I think was the coolest, was there's a Relic of Quest for the Holy Relic deck.
Oh, right, yeah.
He went like...
I do not think it did well.
No, he did badly. So we were tweeting. He did badly in the draft, but his constructed thing was like 5-1. Like, he actually did well in constructed. It was in draft that he like did X 1 in X. Deck sweep. Getting Argentum Armor. For those who don't know what that card does, it's 1 white for an enchantment from Zendikar that...
Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, it gets a quest counter. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gets a quest counter. And you can sacrifice it when it has 5 or more quest counters on it. Search your deck for any equipment and put it onto the battlefield. You may attach it to a creature.
So the best creature to generally do it with is Argentum Armor, which is a lot of mana to equip.
6 cost, 6 to equip.
And when you attack with a creature, destroy target permanent.
It gives equipped creature +6/+6, and when that creature attacks, exile target permanent or destroy target permanent. Yeah, I think it's just Vindicate. It just destroys target permanent.
Yeah. So,
but +6/+6 and a Vindicate every time you attack is pretty
and the deck
spicy.
is playing a bunch of 2x flyers for 1 that have, like, you return a thing to your hand when you play it, so you can, like, play it 3 times in a turn to turn quest on, and then you get it on there, and then you have a flyer with a giant piece of armor on it. It was a standard deck back in the day. It was actually the first deck to play Stoneforge Mystic competitively, I believe, in Modern or in Standard. So it was that, or there might have been a Boros Bushwhacker variant that was playing it to equip the 1-drop core that gets double strike when it's equipped.
This is way before my time.
So these are things that you could do in Zendikar Standard that were all mediocre compared to Jund just being the best deck. I think that was the format where Elves was. Like, it was Jund, Elves, and blue-white control. We're playing Baneslayer Angel were like the three main decks of the format. We're past that now. So what other cool information do you have from all of this data that you've calculated for the weekend?
So I think I've pretty much hit on a lot of the big hitting points. For anyone interested in seeing more, I have all this up on my Twitter.
Okay.
And I do at some point want to kind of collate all this into one place and actually publish it. But for now, like I have hit on most of the big points.
Okay.
And really just the point of all this is I want to kind of challenge the idea that top eights are what matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because as we can see, especially for Mythic Championships, top eights hardly reflect how well the deck actually did.
Right.
Hogaak had 70 decks in day 2, the best conversion rates, the best win percentage, and put one deck into top 8.
Well, and Mythic Championships also exacerbate this problem, right? Like at a Grand Prix event, you have tiebreakers that come and evolve, and there's just so many people playing that the actual people that make it in the top 8 are a lot of coin flips that get you there, where at a Pro Tour, or now Mythic Championship, I tried saying it right and then I went the wrong direction.
You need like a swear jar or something.
Yeah. You get a system where, people just do bad in draft. And if you're not a good limited player, or, and that's kind of classically these professional teams would be overrepresented in what deck they're playing, showing up in the top 8, because professional teams are the best drafters. Like in the end, if you are a Magic pro, your limited prowess has to be that much higher. And that's a skill set that you can draw upon in most formats. Not necessarily your constructed skills, or formats can be different for you based on what format you're playing. Like a lot of pros don't know a lot about Modern, which is why Jund classically was overrepresented at Pro Tours back in the day with Bloodbraid Elf and Deathrite Shaman, due to its easy to play, high win percentage. So you end up with top 8s that aren't very representative or are weirdly represented. You have team play, where an entire team of the best drafters in the world, who will all, sweep through the draft portion of the event, are all playing the same deck. And so there's going to be 4 copies of a weird deck that isn't actually that good in the metagame, but for that exact event, the right pro players were playing it to do well with it.
Yeah, you can 6-4 and make top 8.
Right.
Or I guess it'd probably be 6-3 and 1, but
yeah.
You can get 6 wins in constructed and top 8.
Right.
So I was thinking that it's pretty telling that, the Mythic Championship, I guess the point is to try and distinguish who is the best Magic player. So there's a test of both limited and constructed, but one only has to look at another tournament that happened this weekend, like the Star City Games Open in Columbus, where the top 16 is fully half Hogaak.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing, especially with even the Mythic Championship. Even though only one Hogaak deck made top 8, over half of the decks that went 8 and 2 or better were Hogaak.
Right, and I think even Wizards' communication, as much as they might not like it to be this, has been, we understand that Hogaak is a problem. Yeah. I haven't seen anyone being like, well, look how diverse this top 8 was. We don't have to do anything. And it's more about how do they go about, solving the problem. And I see a lot of people talking about, is it time to ban one of the 1-mana cards? Like there's, Faithless Looting has obviously been this problem for this last year. And before that, Ancient Stirrings, said it right, has been a problem for almost 2 years. And if you look at this top 8, a significant portion of the decks were those 2 cards, right? Like the only deck that wasn't is the Urza deck and Jund.
Which the Urza deck has the other card, Mox Opal.
Yeah, fair. I mean, on the watch list for the last 10 years, I think Mox Opal's never going away.
No, it's just, at this point, the decks that it's used in just aren't powerful enough to warrant a ban.
Right, and there, it's been in a bunch of problematic decks, but it's not the reason those decks are problematic, and you get rid of it in a lot of other decks that are fine. Like, Affinity is fine. It's a deck that scoops the Lightning Bolt. So, I don't think that's really an issue for the format. It does have, I think it's still tied with Merfolk for the most Grand Prix wins of any Mount Modern deck in history, just because they're both consistently been the same power level, and sometimes that power level is the right for that tournament, but I think it's fine. Keep it around. Jun probably can get up there now that Jun's back. Though Jun has like a weirdly disproportionate amount of top 8 losses. Like it doesn't win top 8s. It like shows up in them and then never wins them because it's I think it's the 55% win rate. Like eventually that coin flips badly for them.
Yeah.
Always the bridesmaid.
So I guess my next big question is Hogaak gets banned tomorrow, right? And
Hopefully.
we have which deck would you, both of you, and I'd like to hear Marshall's opinion as well, which deck entering this format, if obviously money was no object, would you pick to win a tournament based on this tournament's data?
I would probably go with the Urza Thopter Sword deck.
Mm-hmm.
While the sample size was a little bit small, its performance overall was pretty impressive. Was tied overall with win percentage with Hogaak, and then it also had the best win percentage in day 2.
Sure.
Which, mind you, only 11 pilots, so not the biggest sample size, but still pretty impressive.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to argue that Tron isn't still like so powerful. There are just like there are a lot of decks that just can't beat quote unquote natural Tron, which mono green Tron gives itself 8 cards that help it get natural Tron. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like until like until they decide whether or not they want to ban the Tron lands, and I don't even think it's an Ancient Stirrings problem. So I think Tron would still exist even without Ancient Stirrings. But I think as long as it has Sylvan Scrying and Explorer's Map or Expedition map, then Tron I think will just always have a certain amount of like, I'm going to jump to turn 7. You're going to still be on turn 3. Can you beat my late game? And a lot of decks just can't. So and especially as long as like I saw that like some of these versions of Tron were not running Great Creator with his various
the one that won wasn't playing Great Creator. Now the one thing
I think both of the ones that won weren't.
Oh, because Tron won the other. Yeah.
Tron also won the SEG.
Right. And speaking of kind of Tron, I wanted to bring this up because the one deck we haven't really talked about is, or I guess we really didn't talk about Phoenix, but Eldrazi Tron also was something that did really well this format in this tournament. And they are the one that plays Karn the Great Creator.
Yeah. I noticed that the mono green Tron decks are now running like 4 Wormcoil Engine in the main. Like they've just gone to, instead of playing Great Creator, they're like, you know what I would rather play than Great Creator is just a 6/6 Death Touch lifelink that you can't get rid of very easily.
I think that's an answer to Hogaak. I think that Wormcoil Engine is good against that deck. It stops most of the things. It gains the life off of the tramples and then kills it with Death Touch. Like it kind of just comes up ahead. Where Karn the Great Creator comes down on turn 4 or 3 at the earliest, but at that point they already have a bunch of creatures in play. So why do you have Hogaak? Well, or like what are you going to do? Like you're not playing a 4-drop Planeswalker that doesn't affect the board. Isn't going to win you the game. So I definitely think that's where it fell off. And that's why the Eldrazi Tron lists were the ones that were playing Karn, because those are the ones that have a bunch of threats to protect it beforehand to keep it safe. And then you have to get through them to be able to kill Karn. And that gives him the time to lock the game up using one of the infinite hate cards he has access to in your sideboard. And by infinite, I mean 15. I think the deck I would play is probably Junt. Partly because Thoughtseizes is good always. That's not always true, but no matter what this format looks like, when we get past the banning of Hogaak, I'm going to have an answer to it. I mean, we have a bunch of decks in the wings that, blue-white control didn't overperform in this tournament, but is still a very powerful deck. And when you look at how it did in the day 2 conversion rates, it did well, right? Like blue-white control is one of the better performing decks that just didn't get to the top 8.
So the win percentage was not great.
Okay.
It had the second worst win percentage.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have a lot of game against Hogaak.
And so, if Hogaak goes away, blue-white control might be an answer.
One of my friends, Daniel Fournier, played blue-white control at the Mythic Championship. And I think he was on main deck Rest in Peace.
Sure.
And he said he lost as many games where he played turn 2 Rest in Peace as he won. Interesting. Yeah.
And is that just because Hogaak has like Vengevines that it's playing, and like Vengevines?
Well, you have a pretty solid plan B. You don't always need your graveyard.
Sure.
And then they also just are running Assassin's Trophy now in the main deck.
Right.
So they have main deck answers to these hate pieces.
And I can imagine just like, the game plan of game one, which is just, I'm going to play a 1/1 for 1, I'm going to play a 1/1 for 2, and I'm going to play a bunch of beaters after that, is a blue-white control decks player's like worst nightmare, because like all their cards are good, and then eventually they get to an answer to the thing that's stopping the big game plan, and you lose.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'd be playing this Orzhov Zombies list because I just think it's so sweet.
Oh yeah, weird list.
And I feel like there's a ability to tweak it to where it's like super strong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like if Hogaak gets banned tomorrow, I feel like graveyard decks get a little bit better because suddenly I feel like a lot of people the pendulum will swing away from how much graveyard hate, and people may overcorrect, thinking, ding dong, hey, Hogaak's dead. And then they'll forget that, like, wait, we were playing a lot of graveyard hate for Is It Phoenix and stuff like that. And like, I could see Phoenix coming right in and crushing all over again.
I think in general, well, I mean, there's one interesting thing. A lot of people and a lot of pros are saying that actually Dredge Hogaak is a better Hogaak deck to play right now than regular Hogaak going into the next tournament, because so many people are expecting this variant of it, that going into the classic Dredge game plan has actually a few win percentages above as far as what people are expecting. I don't know if I agree with that, because I don't see what it's doing much better than what this is doing. It's less resilient to main deck Leyline of the Void.
So there was 3 like major graveyard decks. There was traditional Hogaak, traditional Dredge, and then Hogaak Dredge. Hogaak Dredge had a very small amount of players. They only had 7 players on that list, but it had a pretty respectable, about 55% win percentage.
Yeah.
So it did pretty well. It's just there wasn't a lot of people playing it.
Right. I mean, the interesting thing about the Urza list, too, is it does get better with Hogaak going away, obviously, because it's losing a bad matchup. Or not a bad matchup, but a matchup that is
bad
harder
for everybody.
Well, the weird thing about the Urza deck, to me, is that it is still pretty weak to Leyline of the Void.
Yeah.
So getting rid of all these decks playing Leyline of the Void, or cutting down on the number of decks playing Leyline, can only be good for it.
I think you lose decks playing Leyline of the Void to the main deck. I think that's the main thing that goes away.
That for sure goes away, and that really shouldn't happen outside of open deck lists anyway.
Right. Well, I think that could still happen like if I knew that Hogaak was going to be 25% of the field and I had ways to get rid of it, being Faithless Looting or Seasoned Pyromancer or Bedlam Reveler or other cards, like knowing that I have the mulligan rule on my side to be able to get it is helpful. And then add to the fact that, this card is just so powerful against. Once you remove Hogaak, you even have the Urza decks. You have these other decks, and Urza's decks are going to become more popular because they're really, really sweet. And this is the exact type of deck people are going to want to pick up.
If only I could afford it.
I mean,
it's like one of the more expensive modern decks right now.
Is it? What
because Urza's are like, Urza's like a $60 card, and Mox Opal's super expensive.
I don't think Jund is like Ren and 6 is $100. Liliana is $100. Jund is always the most expensive deck.
Yeah, every card that goes in Jund is automatically $100.
Yeah.
I hope you guys grabbed your Tarmogoyfs while they were cheap, because they're not going to be cheap for very long.
I grabbed I got 2 Ren and 6s at cheap, and then I bought the last 2 recently at not cheap. But I was on Friday when the deck list became live, but before the did well, and I noticed that just like every deck played 4 or 3, and I only had 2, and I have Jund, so I need those cards. If it did well, which it did, it was just going to go up from there, because Modern Horizons is not going to be open very much for much longer.
Yeah. Speaking of that, did you see that the Star City Games Open in Columbus featured in its top 16 a Gruul Phoenix list playing 4
Ren and 6?
Yeah. But it's the kind of, essentially it's like mono red Phoenix that is now going into green for Ren and 6.
Well, and I think Ren and 6 has a chance to just get banned in Legacy. I think that it apparently is super problem. Not that I play a lot of Legacy, but the word on the street is that it has ruined the format.
Yeah, it's kind of, it almost has the Deathrite Shaman problem, where it's homogenizing all of the Delver decks.
Right.
Because every Delver deck, it's just correct to play Ren and 6 now.
Sure. And Ren and 6 plus Wasteland is bad for Magic.
Yeah, that seems less than ideal.
Yeah, it turns out Crucible Worlds is strong. Crucible Worlds costing 2 is even stronger.
And Crucible Worlds costing 2, that is good when you're not playing lands from your graveyard, still is even better.
And what if Crucible Worlds also could allow you to ping something or eventually give all of your spells retrace?
Yeah, and Ren and 6 has pretty much booted Death and Taxes out of the Legacy format.
Interesting. Okay.
Because it just has too many X1s, and if your opponent is just playing a 2-mana, kill all your X1s.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not going to have a good time.
I can see Ren and 6 getting banned. I think it's fine in Modern. I think it's really good there. It definitely is going to need... I'm assuming that they have it on a reprint soon list.
Hopefully.
I would assume... So I guess I have a question. Do you guys think that Modern Horizons 2 is going to happen?
Almost certainly.
Okay.
I for sure think that there will be more sets that print directly into Modern. If it's in the same style as Modern Horizons, I don't know.
Sure.
But there will for sure be more sets that follow the model of these cards are legal in Modern.
Yeah, I think if I was Wizard, the lesson I would take is Modern Horizons 1 had like this gets legalized in Modern thing as like a weird attachment, but it was meant to be a time spiral one. I would imagine that what they would maybe do is focus more on the fact that this is going to be entered to Modern directly and make that more of a idea of what they're looking at than just like nostalgia. But I think that will be part of it still, because that is the reason I love it. I mean, I think Modern Horizons for me is most exciting, partially because I get to play with the cards in Modern, but also because I love all the references and new characters. And we got Yawgmoth finally, and we got Urza finally,
and Sarah finally, and they were all cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
I've seen Modern play, right? I mean,
yeah,
obviously Sarah's the most,
but Sarah's seen some play
Sarah
too.
seen play?
Yeah, it's weird, but it's like
There's some Battle Screech decks
and spirits,
some spirits are playing it also.
Yeah, because it
Interesting.
gives all their creatures +1/+0 and life.
And there's also some Abzan, like the Abzan mid-range style decks that are running like 2 Sarah for the same like.
It's for most decks a better version than Sorin Soul and Visitor, because instead of getting a 2/2 flyer, you get a 4/4 flyer with Vigilance.
That then makes all of your Lingering Souls tokens like legit threats, because now they're all 2/2s. I could see a situation where maybe we don't get Modern Horizons 2 right away, but maybe the next time they do a set a la Battle Bond or something like that, they decide, hey, Battle Bond 2 or Conspiracy 3, this is also going to be Modern legal, and they're going to use that opportunity to reprint some cards that Modern really wants, and then all the cards that the new cards they print are all safe for Modern.
See, I don't think that'll happen. I partially because the resources needed, and this set has shown them that even the resources they spent weren't enough. But the resources needed to kind of test a Modern direct product is something that they need at a higher level than you would need for a Battle Bond set. And they can still reprint cards for Modern. You can put Ren and 6 in every set that's not standard legal forever, and it would be...
They've been doing a good job of putting reprints into the Conspiracies and the Battle Bonds already.
I think the last set that they printed that didn't have Modern cards was Eternal Masters, and it was because it was like the first new Masters set, and they wanted to make sure it was differentiated from Modern Masters, so that was like a shtick. And then I think they realized that was maybe a mistake, because at the same time, they realized, most of the cards that we want to print in Standard, we don't ever want to do, because they're either going to warp the format around them, a la Thoughtseize, or they're so specific, like Inquisition of Kozilek, that it just doesn't work. Like, it's not devoid, and all of the spells in this format need to be devoid, so we can't print this. So they like run into a situation where they can't really reprint stuff into Standard. Now with core sets, it's better, but for a while without core sets especially, the issue is just like most of the big cards in Modern are either too powerful for Standard, or the ones that aren't too powerful are like Bitter Blossom, where it says the word tribal on the front of it. That's never going to be printed on a card again.
I'd also like to point out that I understand where Wizards is coming from, but literally had they put Inquisition of Kozilek into Oath of the Gatewatch, not a soul would have cared.
Sure, I agree with that.
Not a soul. There might have been a few Vorthoses that are like, well, how come there's one not devoid card that represents Eldritch? But everybody else would have been like, guys, shh.
Or they could have just made an Inquisition of Kozilek variant that had devoid.
I think that is what they
didn't want to do.
I don't think you want
because
to
then you
They
could
don't want
theoretically
another of those effects.
because then you could theoretically run 9 plus
Yeah.
Inquisition.
12. Yeah, you can run. Yeah, you can run 12 thoughts.
Because I definitely seen some lists that are running like 4 Thoughtseize and 4 Inquisition of Kozilek, like the rack decks, and
Yeah.
like if they could run 10 of them, they would
that card
probably
is
will.
great for Rack.
I think that I agree with you that no one would have cared, and like it could even be somehow flavored to be like the good guys being Thoughtseized, and or like you have a character that's like using Eldrazi magic, whatever. Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
But more to the point that there are cards in planes that they're just never going to visit again that have like character names on them that like you couldn't print. Like, you can't reprint Geist unless you're back on Innistrad. That's it for today's episode. Definitely a big thank you, Jonathan, for coming on and breaking down stuff. Can you once again shout out to the world at large where people can find you?
Yep. So you can find me on Twitter at TwinAndWinMTG. And then I also have a Twitch that I'm going to try to start streaming a bit more. That's just Twin and Win, and then it's also linked to on my Twitter.
Is that Twin and Win?
It is Twin and Win. If you can imagine, yes, A-N-D, spelled out. If you can imagine, I was a Twin player back in the day.
Are you a Phoenix? Are you an Is It Phoenix player now?
I have the deck built. It has not seen play in a little while because it's not very good.
I'm Matt Kess Wiley. You can find the podcast at the MMCast. You can find Marshall at...
I'm at Marsh Unfocused.
And then make sure, once again, if you're at Grand Prix, or if you're participating in Grand Prix Vegas, or you're at Magic Fest, we'll be there. Me and Ben, I'll be playing Commander the whole time. I'm going to all the Commander events, as well as we're hosting a trivia show. So that's Friday on the stage from 5 to 7. We're going to have a bunch of guests doing cool stuff. I'm assuming, because you're going, you will probably be able to meet Jonathan there as well.
Yep, I will be there playing the main event for Modern.
Yep, and if you're at Gen Con this week, definitely stop by the Kess booth. Go check out the Dragon Love'ems. They're really adorable and fun. Make sure to play Battle Bosses. It's a great game. We made it. It's awesome. It's really fun.
I am undefeated all time.
That is true.
How many games of it have you played, though?
1.
Exactly.
So you're like my dad. I taught my dad to play Magic once with some Portal cards. He beat me, and then he decided he wanted to keep his perfect record, and now trolls me about it at Thanksgiving. He's like, "Hey, Marsh, I know you've played a lot of games of that there Magic, but have you ever lost? Because your old man here
has never lost.
He's never lost a game of Magic in his life."
So back to Battle Bosses. Two big news. So we have actually released. You'll be able to play test for the first time publicly Nightmare, which was a boss that was unlocked during the Kickstarter campaign. He kind of is a Mind Flayer, if you know Stranger Things-esque inspired character that does mind control effects and discard. He kind of plays like 8-rack. And then you have we have a Fairy Empress that was released due to many reasons involving manufacturing. We were able to add a one more boss earlier this year, and you'll be able to play with her for the first time. And she is kind of like, she freezes people with flower tokens and is more of like kind of an aggressive tempo play. So definitely check those out if you're at Gen Con. And then last but not least, I will be on right now, I think if you're listening to this on Wednesday, but tomorrow, which is July 31st, 2019, I will be doing a whole Twitch live stream with this big Magic Arena event. So definitely check that out. There's a link in the below area as well. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you guys next week. I won't be there, but Ben will. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you for your attention. See you later, alligator.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.